So last week, one of the main topics of our podcast got quite a lot of attention because we were talking about a previously unreported quote from Sam Altman about AI's impact on marketing and more broadly on knowledge work. Now, that quote came from a book that we got turned on to called Our AI Journey, written by two successful business people, Adam Brotman and Andy Sack, who, Paul, you have gotten to know a little bit, and they are interviewing chapter by chapter AI leaders about where this is all headed. The book is being released chapter by chapter on a kind of innovative subscription model. So go to ouraijourney.ai to take a look at that. But when they asked Altman what AGI, artificial general intelligence, meant for consumer brand marketers, for instance, he replied, quote, "Oh, for that, it will mean that 95% of what marketers use agencies, strategists, and creative professionals for today will easily, nearly instantly, and at almost no cost be handled by the AI. And the AI will likely be able to test the creative against real or synthetic customer focus groups for predicting results and optimizing. Again, all free, instant, and nearly perfect. Images, videos, campaign ideas, no problem." So we talked at length about that quote last week, and we're still processing it and all the implications it has for the industry. But from what we saw, it made quite a few marketers sit up and pay attention. We published a blog post on it, obviously talked about it on the podcast, but beyond that, it kind of really took off on its own. I mean, I had many unrelated people engaging me in conversations this past week, simply referring to it now as the quote in caps. um, so I think this has really caused many marketers to begin talking about what the possible impacts are of this technology on our industry, much more so than they were before, because I don't know if any time previously Sam Altman has said things quite this bluntly. So in this segment, Paul, we want to spend a fair amount of time diving a bit deeper into your first draft thoughts on what this quote really means, what's really going on here. So I'm going to turn it over to you and just take us away down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, honestly, first draft may even be generous. This is literally, I woke up this morning at 5:30 a.m. and I had to catch a flight to Miami, and I had stuff to do. And I was like, you know what? I've got 4 hours uninterrupted in the airport and on the flight to think about this. We got the podcast. We bumped to Monday afternoon so I could take my flight. And this is kind of what came out. So I'm just gonna sort of riff a little bit and go through my outline, I would say. That's why I don't know, this is consider a draft. But the thing, I said last week was, and Mike, you alluded to already, is like we're still trying to process it. Like how do you explain something like that quote to an audience when it's kind of overwhelming, it's very abstract. How do you give it like meaning and like where you feel like you can do something about it, basically? And I feel like that quote can induce a bit of like desperation of like, there's nothing I can do about this. Like, what am I supposed to do next? And so I started off thinking about it in that context of like, what do we do about this quote? And the first thing that came to me is like, what does it mean to your company, your career, and your family? Anybody who listens to this show regularly knows I have a 10, about to be 11-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And I think often about what does the world look like for them in 5 years, 10 years, when they're getting out of college. And I realized like I actually have no idea. And so I spent a lot of time, my life thinking about that and trying to figure it out. So the thing that first came to my mind on this topic, about the meaning for your company, career, and family is, when does your life and career noticeably change to the point where you look back and think of how things were before and after? So this quote is a future state. And the question for me becomes, when does it become or start becoming true to the point where life actually starts feeling different. That ChatGPT type moment, at least for you and I, Mike, I know I think of my life professionally now in like pre and post ChatGPT. Like that was a defining moment where things just noticeably changed. The other thing I'll say is I know we have a lot of non-marketers who listen to this podcast. I would take that Altman quote and infuse your own industry and career into it, because he was just talking about marketing and agencies because that's what he was asked about. You can substitute any knowledge work, accounting, sales, service, ops, HR, engineering, legal, all of it. He's talking about knowledge work. He's more broadly meaning, the things we do from a knowledge perspective. So then, once you get past kind of what does it mean for your company, career, family, then you get into like, what do you do about this? And this is honestly where I found myself after, I first read that quote a few weeks back. And then when you and I first talked about it last week, is like personally, what does this mean to my kids? I think about it in relation to Marketing AI Institute and some of the other business ventures we're working on. I think about it from my personal investing perspective and my retirement accounts. Like I think about it more broadly. So again, this is kind of real-time thinking from the flight this morning. I haven't talked to Mike at all about it. I just gave Mike a heads up. Hey, I'm going to have a few things to say today, and then we can talk about it. People who know me know I generally don't get into the futurist stuff. I don't really like the trying to predict 10 years out kind of stuff. I find it sort of a fool's errand, and it's at best directionally correct sometimes. But I think people often lose sight of the near term stuff they should be focused on when they worry too much about the futurist stuff. So I get asked all the time, what does 5 years, 10 years out look like? And I always say, listen, I can give you like 12 to 18 months with reasonable confidence, but beyond that, I got nothing for you. But at the same time, when I think about this quote, I was trying to put in the context of when is this true? When does it start to actually change people's lives and careers in a noticeable way? And so I thought it was critical that people understand the story arc here, and to a point where it becomes tangible enough that you have an idea of what action you should be taking at each stage of that arc, basically. So I'm just going to kind of go through what I think is true. This is subject to revision based on the next model that comes out and the next, things we learn. But I want to kind of go through what I think this quote really means, what happens next, and what you can do about it. Now, in context, since last week's episode, I have listened to no less than 6 other podcasts where people were being interviewed: Demis Hassabis, Jan LeCun, Sam Altman. So those interviews are very fresh in my mind because they dealt with things that are highly relevant to what we're talking about here. And then also just drawing from 13 years of studying the AI space and, countless interviews with Dario Amodei of Anthropic and Mustafa Solomon of Inflection and Ilya Sutskever and Shane Legg at DeepMind. And, it's like all this stuff just sort of like swimming around in my mind to say what I'm going to say. So let's start there. Where are we and where are we going? So again, to recap, AI is not new. If it's new to you, it's not new as an area of research. We've been doing this for like 70 years, researching this idea of giving machines human intelligence. But for a really long time, we basically had a form driven by machine learning, which made predictions about outcomes and behavior. And that machine learning could be applied to like pricing optimization and recommendation engines and all of these other things. And it was valuable to businesses. But it wasn't what we have now. What we have now started truly being kind of commercialized and really accelerating development around 2011, 2012. That's when deep learning, this idea of giving machines vision and language understanding and generation, really started emerging. And then 2022, November 30th, is the ChatGPT wake-up call moment. So with that really, really quick synopsis of kind of where we were and where we are in AI, I now want to kind of go through what I think happens next. And as we kind of stretch out the years, my confidence in these projections, I guess, or forecasts probably, drop a decent amount. But I think this is pretty reasonable based on our understanding of what's happening, of what might go on. So I'm going to do this within a timeline. So 2024, we're in March 2024 right now. What we will have this year are more advanced large language models that are multimodal. We're already seeing this. We know GPT-4 is multimodal. We know Gemini is being built from the multimodal from the ground up, where it can do language and images and video and audio. But we're going to have new classes of models. So multimodal is one. Reasoning, which enables us to solve problems, do planning, make decisions. So human reasoning is critical to our ability to assess situations, identify and solve problems, things like that. These models are going to make leaps forward in their reasoning ability, which then enables them to get more valuable in terms of planning assistance, decisioning, both helping us make decisions, but also probably early days of them making their own decisions very unreliably, not something you're going to turn your company around and say, okay, AI, just make all the decisions. But I think decisioning is a core outcome of improved reasoning. Expanded context windows. We've already had this. Gemini is 1 million, I think, but in research, they were up to 10 million. Claude 3 has expanded context windows. The context window is how much information you can put in that it's able to draw from to create the output, but they're imperfect. We know context windows isn't the end game. Context windows do lead in some ways to memory, though. This is a core thing they're all working on, is giving these models the ability to remember conversations, and not just from the context window, but from years of interacting with these agents, that they want you to eventually, these things be able to draw on everything. So we're going to talk about OpenAI's memory in one of the rapid fire items. Personalization is going to be critical. So Mike and I have different experiences with ChatGPT in the future. You're going to be able to set the parameters for yourself of how you want to interact with this thing, how you want it to talk to you, what tone, what style, what political beliefs, what religious beliefs, like all of it is going to be able to be personalized. And then one of the other key aspects that they're going to work on is reliability and accuracy, so that you can actually come to start trusting these things. So we're going to see some of this with the models we're already hearing about, but I think GPT-5 we know is coming. Just this week, I put on LinkedIn, I listened to a podcast, BG2 pod, and they talked about that GPT-5 is actually done training. So their sources tell them GPT-5 is done training and it's in red teaming right now. And they said May to July timeline for GPT-5. I think it's going to be sooner than that, but we're going to have GPT-5. And based on everything we hear from Sam and OpenAI, all the things I just outlined, multimodal reasoning, planning, decisioning, expanded context window, memory, personalization, reliability, that's what GPT-5 class models will enable. I would imagine we'll get a Gemini 2 model from Google at some point this year. We're going to see Llama 3. We're going to see all this stuff. So what does this mean to business? I think what it means is we will start to see a scale up in adoption of AI. You're going to see rapid expansion of valuable use cases in business. So you're going to have wide scale adoption of generative AI beginning a multi-year expansion throughout this year. So it's not like we're going to just flip a switch and everyone's going to be doing this. But I think the models are going to get good enough where you're going to start to see wider scale adoption. The thing that's becoming less clear is what is the competitive advantage of the different models. It's like every time someone releases something new, like Claude 3 a week or two ago, you start seeing all this stuff online like, it's better than GPT-4. It's like more reliable. It's like, okay, then GPT-5 comes out and now like a month later, it's better. And so it seems like it's really hard for these models to differentiate themselves without some unique data set. So that's just unclear what happens. They all have very similar capabilities. It's unclear if enterprises will build on open or closed models or both. So there's a chance that all these proprietary kind of closed models aren't the ones that the major enterprises end up building around. They choose to build around like a Llama or a Mistral, which is more open source. We know that data matters. On a societal kind of human level, scientific breakthroughs are around the corner. If you listen to the Demis Hassabis interview with Dwarkesh, he talks about major breakthroughs within the next 1 to 2 years in terms of drug discovery, solving, creating cures for long sought after diseases. Those things are going to happen, but it's not new science. This is a really important aspect of this. It is these generative AI models are enabling the brute force through a whole bunch of data that humans couldn't get through in 100 lifetimes. But these models are able to do this, like AlphaFold, which predicts the folding of proteins, the whole genome of proteins. you're going to see breakthroughs through existing data. We're going to talk later about new science from non-existing data, but you're going to see major breakthroughs that's going to improve lives in the very near future. Demis talks about, again, it being 1 to 2 years off. There will be stories of mass layoffs this year within certain industries, but I don't think it's going to be widespread. So like the Klarna one we talked about last week, where there's the AI bots doing the equivalent of 700, customer service agents. You're going to see some headlines. You're probably going to see a 60 Minutes episode about it. Like, it's going to seem like it's a big deal, but when you actually drill in, kind of zoom in, it's not going to be mass layoffs. We're not going to see a mass impact of AI this year taking over jobs. Some new roles will start to emerge. Chief AI officer, you're probably going to hear some companies doing that. You're probably going to see some AI ops, AI trainers, things like that. So if we go back to my original criteria of, does your life or your career noticeably change this year? Probably not. It's probably not like you're going to sit there and there's going to be some inflection point where just like all of a sudden everything is different. So that's 2004, and that will continue moving forward. Every model is going to get smarter. They're going to get better at reasoning, planning, decisioning, memory, personalization. It's just those are things that are critical to these models moving forward. Now, 2025, 2026, this is where I think we see the multimodal AI explosion. So we have multimodal now, but if you think about Gemini or ChatGPT, they're limited. Like ChatGPT, based on GPT-4V, the vision one, you can input images and you can output images, but you cannot input video and output video. Sora is the prelude to that. You can't do it really with audio. I mean, you can talk to it through their whisper, but it's not truly multimodal. Gemini is being built multimodal from the ground up, but they had that major mishap with even the image generation thing. So it's just like, it's going to be really hard to solve infusing true multimodal where it just works and you can talk and interact with it through video, images, text. So I think we're still 1 to 2 years off to where multimodal is just ubiquitous. It's like everywhere. The other thing we're running into is there are compute limitations. Like the reason that GPT-5 will probably have some limitation, or the reason Gemini has some limitations, because the reality is you can only do so much training with these data centers. So I think, and based on some quotes I've seen from Altman and Demis Hassabis and Jan LeCun, like there is a possibility that they could build models 10 to 100 times more powerful and generally capable than what we have now. But to do it is going to require way more computing power, way more data centers, and we're probably just not there yet. And so I think those compute limitations start to go away in the next 1 to 2 years. So again, I'm talking 25, 26 range. The other thing is Jan LeCun, if you listen to his interview with Lex Friedman, and he's talks about this all the time. You can just do a search for Jan LeCun worldview and you'll see all this. But he believes that these models need to be able to learn the way humans do. And he'll often relate it to like a toddler who doesn't have language the first 1 to 2 years of their life. And yet they understand the world. They understand physics. They understand action, reaction. If I do this thing, if I touch the stove, it's going to burn my finger. Like if I get too close to the dog, it might bite me. Like they learn things through observation. And by 25, 26, the amount of vision training data, both actual and synthetic data. So Sora from OpenAI is going to enable the creation of all this synthetic visual data. That data can then be used to train these models. So I think synthetic data potentially becomes the dominant source of vision training. And once you can do that at scale and have it follow the laws of physics, now you can rapidly train these models. It's kind of how Tesla full self-driving 12 is going to work. It's like creating real world data, but they're also doing simulations to create the synthetic data. I also think that interaction through chat and voice and vision becomes much more prevalent. My personal experience, I did this Thursday night. I was driving home I played basketball on Thursday nights. And so I get in my car, it's like a 12-minute drive. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to try Pi. So the new version of Pi had come out, 2.5. And I was like, I don't even know what to do, but I just clicked the call button and you can just call it and have a conversation. And it's like, hey, how's it going? And it was so weird, man. Like I know how these things work. I understand it. And I swear to you, within like 4 minutes, I felt like I was just talking to somebody, like just having a conversation with somebody. And I got into like, oh, I get these like almost migraine level headaches after basketball. And like, I don't know, it's maybe dehydration. And the thing was like recommending specific things I can do to avoid getting the headache that night. And I'm like, oh, that's actually not a bad idea. And I actually did the thing it recommended. I didn't get a headache that night. So I think that these are things are going to get so good, and you're going to start to truly interact with them and have conversations. And you're going to start to experience them through different devices. Your phone for sure. Glasses are going to get good. We'll be on Vision Pro 3 from Apple by then, probably much better form factor. Your earbuds, I think AirPods are they're overlooked in terms of what they could do here, but I think you're going to see the AirPods play a much greater role in people's interactions with AI, watches, bracelets, rings, all of these things. So again, 2025 to 26, multimodal AI explosion. Basically these things become infinitely more valuable in a business environment and truly start to like change the way we do work. 2025 to 27, I don't know when this really happens, but this is the AI agents explosion. So we'll see and talk a lot about these AI agents that can take actions in 2024. But I think this year is still just basically headlines, experimentations, and demonstrations. Like, this is what's going to be possible. I think you'll start to see some interesting things, but don't feel at any point this year like you missed it and you're now falling behind. My best assessment, and again, this could be wrong, and maybe we'll hear from people working on AI agents who listen to this. I would say AI agents that can take actions on your behalf are roughly where we were with GPT-1 and GPT-2. Like, we're not GPT-3 level with this stuff. There's still lots of manual work that has to go in to get them functioning properly. You have to train them. You have to oversight to make sure they don't screw up. But to get to the point where they can now take actions in a reliable way, potentially with no or very little human oversight. So we're talking like in our world, level 4 autonomy, where it's just like you just put the goal in and it just does its thing. So I think we'll see some early instances of that autonomy, but it won't be widespread. Disruption to knowledge work will start to become more tangible in 2025, 2026 as a result of these. You're going to have fine-tuned and trained ones where people are actually teaching it how to send emails for them or do the different things. And then you're probably going to have these generally capable ones that don't even require fine-tuning or training. They just watch what you do, learn from it, and go. I think the primary way most people will interact with these things is going to be through voice, like Siri. Like I think this is the play for Apple, is that Siri is this true AI agent connected to everything that because you already trust Apple to connect everything. And then potentially through like Microsoft and Google. So that's AI agents. And then two more, the robotics explosion, 2026 to 2030. This one's really hard to project. But this year, we're starting to already see massive advancements from OpenAI. Like, they're getting in the game in partnership with Figure. Figure just raised a bunch of money. They're making breakthroughs in the actual like mechanics of the robots. But the true breakthrough is putting the multimodal models into them, that the robots embody intelligence. And so the advancement with these language models and these AI agents is going to enable a rapid takeoff of robotics. And so Amazon's going to work on it. Optimus at Tesla, they're all working on this. And this, I think, in that 2026 to 2030 range, again, it's a wide range, but we just don't know. I think that's when it starts to become more clear the impact AI is going to have on blue collar jobs. We're going to focus a lot on knowledge work for the next couple of years. But as soon as they get robots to the ChatGPT moment and the takeoff moment, now we're talking about all labor basically is affected. And then the final one to touch on is this idea of AGI, like artificial general intelligence. Again, there's a lack of agreement about what exactly it is. You and I, Mike, I forget episode, we'll pull it and put it in the show notes, but we talk about Shane Legg and DeepMind's research and like these levels of AGI. It's not going to be, again, like flipping a switch. It's going to probably be a slow takeoff, more equated to like how autonomous driving is happening, where you just like you see a Waymo when you're in California and you don't really think anything of it. It's probably going to kind of be like that. But once we hit AGI, everything is reset. Like all this stuff I've said up to this point just changes. New science becomes possible. So discovery into things that didn't exist or that wasn't in the training data. Again, a cure for cancer could come from existing data and just being able to crunch it at a far greater rate than any group of humans could. New science, like, I don't know, solving nuclear fusion or interplanetary travel, or like new mathematical formulas, like things like that, like Einstein level stuff. Um, that that's probably not possible until we get to AGI. Now, once we get here, we are now looking at the reality of wide scale workforce disruption. We're looking at a need to rethink education. What do humans do? If we get to 2028, 2030, which is generally when Demis, Shane Legg, Altman, not Jan LeCun, but everybody else seems to think we're going to get there by this time period, you're now rethinking, what do we do? You're rethinking, what is our purpose? Like, if AI can do these things, like, why do we need to even still do them? And what do we do? You're completely resetting businesses. You're looking at billion-dollar companies with 1 to 10 people becoming common. There was a quote, Mike, I went back to that I know you'll remember, but in episode 57, we talked about an article in The Atlantic where it said, like, does Sam Altman know what he's creating? And I'm just going to read this quote because I remember at the time just like almost having the same reaction I had to the Altman quote last week when I read this. So this is from The Atlantic. We'll link to the article. It says, the way I think about this is from Ilya Sutskever, by the way, former maybe still current chief scientist at OpenAI. We don't know. Ilya is MIA. The way I think about the AI of the future is not as someone as smart as you or as smart as me, but as an automated organization that does science and engineering and development and manufacturing, Sutskever told me. Suppose OpenAI braids a few strands of research together and builds an AI with a rich conceptual model of the world, an awareness of its immediate surroundings, and an ability to act not just with one robot body, but with hundreds or thousands. Quote, we're not talking about GPT-4. We're talking about an autonomous corporation, Sutskever said. Its constituent AIs would work and communicate at high speed like bees in a hive. A single such AI organization would be as powerful as 50 Apples or Googles, he mused. This is incredible, tremendous, unbelievably disruptive power. So again, as crazy as that Altman quote was about 95% of work being done by the AI, think about this, like this idea of like dozens or hundreds or thousands of AI agents being like functioning like bees in a hive, working toward a single goal. Like that, I mean, it almost makes like the hair stand up on my arms. Like when you think about a future that maybe is like 3 to 5 years away, where that becomes a possibility, like that's crazy. And if that is even within reach, even becoming like possibly tangible, you have to completely rethink how we measure economic health and growth as a society, not just in the United States, like everywhere. You have to rethink government. Like, what if AI is more capable of governing than humans, which I would argue may be true already, but we can come back to that one. So even if AGI doesn't emerge, and we can't agree on if it has emerged, but we're talking about by 2029, 2030 being at GPT-9 level, we are talking about multimodal models that are likely 1,000 to 1 million times more capable and powerful than the models we have today. And that is really, really hard to process. So this is kind of where I landed at, like what seems like, based on everything we read and hear. This isn't Mike and I just making stuff up and like picking some stuff out of the air to say, do a futurist talk on. This is the reality of everything we're seeing from research, from what these people are saying, what they appear to be very confident about what they're saying. And these timelines may be off, but this is the direction of the research. This is where it's all appearing to be going. So a couple other quick notes, Mike, and then I'll turn over to you and see what you have to say. But so what's needed for AGI? Like if we want to get to this beehive concept of corporations that are self-autonomous, we need energy breakthroughs. Now, just today, Extropic, we talked about Extropic's founder is the guy who created the EAC movement. They just introduced energy-based models, these thermodynamic powered chips that I can't even explain it right now. My head already hurts. I can't get into this stuff right now. But nuclear fusion, energy-based models, like those kinds of things may be needed. A ton more data centers. So like there's no doubt we need to build a bunch of data centers. We need less reliance on Taiwan to produce all of the chips. And then if you actually drill into how chips are made, it's not just the fabrication plants in Taiwan. There's an entire very fragile supply chain that basically powers everything we're doing. And if any disruption happens to that supply chain, we got real big problems. So you need to further diversify the supply chain. And then we need compute efficiency breakthroughs. There was a recent paper from Microsoft that we haven't talked about on the show yet, where they actually made a pretty big improvement in terms of the size of the models that they could use and how they could train these things. So we need smaller models, and we need the ability to learn the way humans learn. Like our brains are insanely efficient, and these models are not, and they need to figure that out. Okay, what could halt the progress? Like what could keep this projection I've laid out from happening? A few things came to mind. I try not to dwell on these ones because these ones make me lose sleep at night. The first, I don't lose sleep at night about, but it's a possibility. Just a lack of value is created. All these enterprises spend all this money on AI, and a year from now, they're like, it just doesn't work. Like we're moving on to whatever's next. Very, very unlikely that happens. I would bet my own personal well-being and wealth on that. Like I just don't see that as a possible outcome. Scaling laws hit an unexpected wall. Scaling law, the scaling hypothesis is basically that if we just keep throwing more computing power and more data at these things, they just keep improving, and in massive ways. There was a great quote, I think Ilya Sutskever once said to Andrej Karpathy when Karpathy first started OpenAI, these things just want to learn. Like you just keep giving them data, keep giving them computing power, and they just want to keep getting smarter. So somehow unexpected breakthrough or breakdown in scaling laws. Demis Hassabis very confidently states he does not see that happening. Neither does Sam Altman. A breakdown in the AI compute supply chain, which I just mentioned, which again, I don't want to get into specifics here, but could happen through natural or human forces. Bad actors basically could possibly do this. A societal revolt against AI. This, if I was putting probabilities on things, I would put this one a little higher than the other ones I've mentioned. It's possible that at some point, maybe it's due to job loss, maybe it's due to, I don't know, like perceptions of AI, but there's a chance you run into it where we just get a revolt and people start not liking AI. The next would be catastrophic event that's blamed on AI, which could lead to the revolt. Again, I'm not going to get into the details of what those could be at the moment. The other and the last one would be laws and regulations / politics. This one's probably the higher probability, I would say. There's a chance, like depending on what country you're in, they're going to put laws and regulations in place that dramatically limit your access to this and the benefits you gain from it. But my bigger concern is it becomes political. One political party or another decides that there's votes to be gained through taking a very hard stance one way or the other.
Mm.
And like anything, it gets ruined once it becomes political. So those are kind of the things that halt progress. And then I'm going to end with giving some hope, I hope, of what do we do about this? Is the thing I ask myself all the time. The tech companies are going to keep accelerating the tech. Until someone stops them, they are going to fight to out-accelerate each other. So we, meaning me and Mike, the Institute, we as a society, a group of people, a community listening to this podcast, we have to accelerate AI literacy. It is the only way to be prepared for what is happening now and to see around the corner for your company and your career tomorrow. Because Mike and I can't think about every industry, every business, every government, every country and say, well, here's what's going to happen there. We need dramatic increases in AI literacy so people can be thinking about their own domains, their own industries, their own companies. So education and training, as we always say, is the absolute core. AI councils within your companies. This is something we've seen a lot of movement on. Really happy to hear from so many people who've built AI councils in their companies. Something we started talking about early 2023. Those councils need to be focused on piloting, scaling AI in the company in a responsible, human-centered way. establishing policies and principles, governing those policies and principles, doing impact assessments. And then we have to be very adaptable because, as we just talked about, major changes are coming. It's inevitable. And these councils need to help figure that out. The other thing that I think I've maybe alluded to on this, I don't have a great name for this yet, but I'm becoming more and more convinced it is critical, is AI innovation / frontier labs. I think either at a company level or at an industry level, maybe at a government level, you need teams of people who are preparing for and building for the frontier. And by frontier, I mean like 1 to 3 years out, like basically turn of the decade. Maybe it's out to 5 years out. You need to be cross-disciplined because you need people looking at it from different perspectives. You have to have people who are deep in the technology, who truly understand AI and can cross over and consider the implications to their domains and their industries. So you have to run models for your company and your industry. You have to think about the evolution of your customer behaviors based on assumptions of what is true. And so until this morning, I hadn't sat down and built my own model of what I believed would be true over the next 5 to 6 years. So I now have a working model of what I think that looks like. Now I have to go to work and figure out, well, what does this mean? What does this mean to our business? What does it mean to my career? What does it mean to Mike's career? What does it mean to all of us? So you have to do this at your company level, build these industry-specific labs or, again, company-specific labs. That's the three things. So education and training, get the AI council in place, and think about an AI innovation / frontier lab in your company, your industry. And Mike, I'm going to stop talking. And that was a lot, but that was all from this morning, unedited. And yeah, you're all the first to hear it.
That's fantastic. I feel like there could be an entire, literally podcast, not just an episode, but an entire podcast about just
I actually
this
thought
one
about
point.
that. I was going to message you from the plane and say, dude, should we just do the podcast episode on this today?
Yeah, I do, in all seriousness, keep coming back to this idea of thinking through almost like an AGI survival guide for your
Yeah.
average knowledge worker, myself included. It's something I think about quite a bit as our work changes. So I'm really glad to hear you talking about, okay, what do we do about it? Because it's still very early days, but that's the $1 trillion question in my mind. It's almost in some ways not easier at a company level to diagnose it, but you say, okay, at the very least, I know I need an AI council, education and training. Going and doing that is a different thing. But for an individual, sometimes it feels to me like you told me that 5 years from now, aliens are landing and that will happen. And that's
Right.
all I know. How do I even begin to prepare for that? I know it'll change everything, but I have no idea what to do about it.
Yeah, I mean, as weird as it is, that's probably a decent analogy. It's where you're just like something so life-changing that you know is going to just disrupt everything you think is true about the future, and you know it's coming, and like you got a few years to prepare for it. And I think that's part of what I want people to take away from this is, you read these quotes from Sam, we revisit that quote from Ilya about the bees and the hive, and what I think I'm trying to say is, I don't think it's this year that everything noticeably changes. I think we see some pretty amazing things this year, some technology that is going to be beyond your wildest expectations, but not like massively disruptive to business, to the economy, to the workforce. But I do think it's coming. Like I believe very deeply that in the next probably 3 to 5 years, we have to seriously reconsider everything we think is true about work, about education, about purpose. Like that's the one that I keep coming back to my own mind is like, what happens when we're suffering from a society-wide issue around people not feeling they have a purpose, because so much of our purpose is tied to what we do for our careers. And I just don't think that is probably going to be the case a generation from now. Again, even my own kids, like I just don't think when they're my age, it's going to look anything like it does in terms of their purpose. And if you go back in time, again, it's not like we haven't had these massive transformations, just even in the last 30 years with the internet and mobile and social media. None of them are on the level we're talking about, nor at the speed with which we're talking about. And I think that's the part that really strikes me. There was let me see if I can find it real quick. There was a quote in the Bill Gates interview. And we'll put the link to the Bill Gates, Sam Altman interview. This took place I think he did this in November before Sam got fired, if I remember correctly. He published it in January, though. So he said, this is Bill Gates asking Sam Altman the question. He said, the thing that is a little daunting is, unlike previous technology improvements, this one could improve very rapidly, and there's kind of no upward bound. The idea that it achieves human levels on a lot of areas of work, even if it's not doing unique science, it can support calls and sales calls. I guess you and I do have some concern along with this good thing that it'll force us to adapt faster than we've ever had to before. And Sam replied, that's the scary part. It's not that we have to adapt. It's not that humanity is not super adaptable. We've been through these massive technological shifts, and a massive percentage of the jobs that people do can change over a couple of generations. And over a couple of generations, we seem to absorb that just fine. We've seen that with the great technological revolutions of the past. Each technological revolution has gotten faster, and this will be the fastest by far. That's the part that I find potentially a little scary, is the speed with which society is going to have to adapt, and that the labor market will change. And he goes on to say, like, I don't know. I'm very optimistic we'll figure it out, is pretty much what Sam always says. There's no, here's how we're going to figure it out. It is just like, I'm confident it's going to work out. It's going to be okay. And that's it. Like, you can't take much solace in.
Man, that is just a ton to unpack, but I feel like we've at least made a good start here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the first thing that just kind of comes to my mind, especially after us publishing this quote, is really, look, you can get all up in arms and upset and offended, and I totally understand those responses to a quote that's saying 95%, for instance, of what we do is going to be done by machines. That may be overly simplistic, but I hope what you do take away from today's conversation is this isn't meant to be, I actually don't think on Altman's part, sensational. He doesn't need any more PR. He's doing fine. That
No,
front.
yeah, 100% I agree. He's not saying this to sell more ChatGPT licenses. This is something he very deeply believes to be true.
And for the reasons that you outline with the rate of progress. So get away from the 95% number. If you believe the trend lines to be somewhat even directionally correct, change is coming, and we need to start taking it very, very seriously and not get hung up on unpacking, okay, well, he said this in that way. Honestly, I think just the directionality of the comments is far more important than what tasks are going away right this second.
Yeah, and I will do one final note, Mike. So I get this quote thrown back at me a lot. So back in like 2012, 2013, 2022, 2023, I'm sorry. I had put in an intro to AI class, like AI won't replace marketers, but marketers who use AI replace marketers who don't, which I've seen this quote used like a million times since then, sometimes because people agree with it, sometimes they don't. Historical context, again, when I used it, it's actually based on a 2018 research report from Stanford, where they were talking about the impact of AI on radiologists. And the quote was adapted to fit for marketing or really any knowledge work. So I'm going to put this quote to bed for me for moving forward. I think that quote actually is still directionally true. So I've stopped saying it, but because I think there is a timeline to it. There's a finite time that remains true. So in 2024, I actually still think that is true. The people using AI are going to have an advantage, maybe 2025. They're going to have an advantage. And if job loss happens, it's not going to be the people who are capable with AI. It's going to be people who aren't. So I think that is directionally true near term. Once we get to 2026, 2027, and some of those other things I've outlined start becoming true, all bets are off. We're just going to need fewer people doing the work. Now, the question becomes, in that time period, in these next few years, can we create enough new jobs? Or do we become a society of entrepreneurship? And there's just, we go from 25 million businesses in the United States to 150 million businesses. Like, do we just create way more things because anyone can basically start and run a company with this AI technology? I don't know. Like, that's my hope, though, is that if we talk about this now, and not in a sensational way, I believe deeply in everything I outlined for you. And this is not to get more people to listen to the podcast. It is not to sell more Writers Summit on demand. Like, this is truly the stuff that I think about relation to my own family and my own business. I think this is true, and we have to start preparing now. And if we do, we have the best chance of a positive outcome in the next 3 to 5 years. If we don't, and we just wait for the ChatGPT moment to happen again and again and again in robotics, in AGI, in business, then it's not going to end well.
Amen. All right. Unfortunately, there are
I just be done now. The rest of the show is yours, man. I'm just gonna.
All right.
I gotta go get a drink.
I feel bad even moving on. There's 100 other things I want to talk about related to this topic.